On May 13th, US President Donald Trump landed in the Saudi Arabian capital of Riyadh. As he stepped off Air Force One, he was greeted on the runway by a smiling Saudi crown prince, Mohammed bin Salman. It was the start of his first major foreign trip of his second term. After Saudi Arabia, he added to his passport stamp collection with visits to Qatar and the United Arab Emirates. On his first day in Saudi Arabia, Trump and the Crown Prince attended the US-Saudi Investment Forum in Riyadh, where Trump hailed the Crown Prince and the changes that he has overseen in his country.
The transformations have been unbelievably remarkable. Before our eyes, a new generation of leaders is transcending the ancient conflicts of tired divisions of the past and forging a future where the Middle East is defined by commerce, not chaos, where it exports technology, not terrorism, and where people of different nations, religions, and creeds are building cities together, not bombing each other.
Trump's glowing assessment obviously worked, as he left the region on May 16th with business deals and investments which could be as high as $4 trillion. At least, according to Donald Trump. As well as securing deals, he also made a number of political proclamations, lifting all sanctions on Syria, and also declaring, once again, that he wishes to make a deal with Iran.
I want to make a deal with Iran. If I can make a deal with Iran, I'll be very happy if we're going to make your region and the world a safer place. But if Iran's leadership rejects this olive branch and continues to attack their neighbors, then we will have no choice but to inflict massive maximum pressure, drive Iranian oil exports to zero like I did before.
As Trump enjoyed the hospitality of his Gulf business partners, in Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sat alone. Despite being in the region and Israel being a close friend of the US, Donald Trump chose not to include a stopover in Israel on his recent trip. This week, why did Trump decide to visit the Gulf first? What is he hoping to get out of them? And what does his decision to skip Israel say about its relationship with the US? My name is Hugo Goodridge, and you're listening to The New Arab Voice. Trump's decision to take his first foreign trip to the Gulf was an homage to his first term in office. Shortly after being sworn in 2017, he visited Saudi Arabia for the Riyadh summit. Trump clearly has a soft spot for the region, but why?
One can't avoid the personal element. They treat him with the, highest respect and accolades. He obviously likes that.
This is Paul Salem, Senior Fellow at the Middle East Institute.
There are also a lot of business deals with him and his family and investment opportunities. So that is out there. But I think one must get beyond that to understand sort of more the political, economic, and to some degree, hence, strategic aspect to this.
The Trump family and its businesses do have interests in the Gulf, and when the head of the company is directly related to the President of the United States, it can be a real boon. But beyond the fairly obvious corruption, there are political gains to be made in the Gulf, which is very appealing to Trump.
As a president, and when it says putting America first or make America great again, as a businessman, he thinks first and foremost of business, of investment, of economics, of jobs and those kind of things. When he looks to Western Europe, he doesn't see great benefits as you see. He looks at the relationship rather competitively in terms of trade and economics and so on, putting aside the issue of Ukraine and NATO and all the other things and what he sees as a drain on the US. When he looks to the Gulf, he sees a number of things. He sees certainly the biggest purchaser of American weapons, security, and defense systems. He sees also hundreds of billions of dollars of investment from their companies, their sovereign wealth funds, indeed trillions of dollars in the U.S. economy. The Gulf countries are the locus of maybe the highest available capital and cash to be spent internationally, and a lot of it is spent in the United States.
As Trump sees it, a trip to the Gulf will return contracts and investment deals. Whereas he believes if he were to visit Western Europe, he would likely be asked to pay for something. Doesn't seem to matter what he's being asked to pay for, he just doesn't want to pay. Following his 2017 trip, he left with a stack of order forms for military hardware worth billions. He secured more orders this time, but also something else.
What stood out in this trip in a major way was something much more, I would say, significant and future-oriented, which was major deals and agreements on computer processing and artificial intelligence mega centers. Certainly in the UAE with a massive project there, and another one in Saudi Arabia. The US obviously looks to its global positioning in the economy and its global competition with China, and increasingly with Trump's alliance, I would say, with the tech titans of Silicon Valley, which was definitely not the case in his first term, that he sees and understands the country that dominates AI and technology, that type of advanced technology and chip making and processing will dominate at least the first half of the 21st century.
Deals for new technology and new technology infrastructure were the standout of his Gulf trip. And it was clear that these types of deals were in the making when you saw who Trump's travel buddies were. Of course, there was Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth. But more significantly, also in tow were OpenAI's Sam Altman, NVIDIA's Jensen Huang, IBM's Arvind Krishna, and of course, the now former fanboy, Elon Musk.
The Gulf countries have decided to join themselves at the hip in terms of this AI technology and chip technology and so on, rather than go with China. And the Gulf will add enormous amounts of AI processing capacity for American companies and part of that American sort of global alliance on tech. So that is extremely significant.
In terms of business, there are obvious reasons as to why Trump wanted to visit the Gulf. But it was also a meeting of minds that share similar thoughts.
The Gulf countries are also more or less in agreement with him that they are, I would say, they want wars to end. They really have no commitment to major conflicts. They want the Israel-Palestine war to end. They want to proceed with Abraham Accords under certain conditions. They did not take sides in the Russia-Ukraine war. They simply want it to end. They don't want conflict with Iran. They want a deal. And Trump is on the same page with all of those things. And when you compare that with the position of the Netanyahu government in Israel, the government in Israel is a financial and economic sinkhole. It's where the U.S. spends a lot of money and, as it were, in their mind, loses a lot of money rather than makes money. And Netanyahu seems to be committed to perpetual and expanding war. Trump is trying to be committed to the opposite.
There were a number of deals signed during the trip. Some of the highlights include a strategic economic partnership agreement signed by Trump and Mohammed bin Salman that includes a $142 billion letter of intent to improve defense capabilities. NVIDIA and AMD announced they would provide semiconductors to Humane, a Saudi artificial intelligence company, as part of a $10 billion project. DataVault, a Saudi company committed to invest $20 billion into US energy infrastructure and data centers. There were over $243 billion worth of deals in Qatar, including a $1 billion defense agreement with Raytheon for Qatari counter-drone capabilities. And in the UAE, US Department for Commerce announced a deal with the Emirates and Emirati artificial intelligence firm G42 to establish the largest data center for artificial intelligence outside of the United States in Abu Dhabi. Those are just a few of the deals. The US got a lot from this trip, but so did the Gulf. It might not have been perfectly balanced, but it's likely that neither side ended the visit feeling hard done by.
I think what is clear is that I wouldn't say that the US is needy in the sense that, couldn't do without the Gulf, but the US clearly and particularly on the future of AI and technology greatly benefits in that sort of sense of competing with China, needs that extra capacity, that massive extra capacity that the Gulf will bring in. So there's a need there. I think the Gulf is more needy of the United States in an existential sense, that the security of the Gulf is still ensured by the United States military, period. Obviously, that, the Gulf does not ensure America's actual security. So on the security side, it is very obvious and very different. The Gulf gets security from the U.S. The U.S. gets a lot of money, buying of weapons and investment and so on. So the relationship is multi-layered. They both benefit from it. The Gulf needs the U.S. in terms of security. The Gulf does not need the U.S. in an existential sense economically. In other words, the Gulf has many economic options, economic potential partners. It is choosing to go with the U.S. because the Gulf sees that the U.S. is the best place to do business, the best place to invest, is the best economic partner. But if they didn't have the U.S., they'd have other options.
While the Gulf and the US administration walked away happy, in Israel there were more despondent feelings. Despite being in the region and despite the unbreakable friendship that they have, US President Donald Trump did not take the opportunity to make a stop in Israel and visit Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. But why? Why not drop in on one of your closest allies?
Well, I mean, publicly, his reasoning was simply that he had business to do in the Gulf, and the relationship with Israel was solid, and they didn't needed to visit.
This is Charles Dunn, Senior Non-Resident Fellow at the Arab Center, Washington, D.C.
Privately, it's another story. I think Trump has been trying to basically monetize his presidency, and he saw this as a more lucrative opportunity than stopping in Israel. So I believe that's a big part of the story here, which the administration doesn't really want to talk about.
There is an important distinction to make here when it comes to the US and Israel.
I believe that the relationship between Trump, and we have to say this, it's not the relationship between the United States and Israel anymore. It's the relationship between Trump and Israel and Trump and Netanyahu. And I think that relationship is indeed fraying a little bit about the edges. Bibi is not fit into any of the little boxes that Trump wants to put foreign leaders into. He's being more obstreperous. He's being more difficult to deal with.
Trump likes to win, and he doesn't like losers, or risk being tarred with the same brush.
I don't believe Trump wants to be associated with people who are thought to be losing, certainly not losing the public relations battle in America and in Europe and around the world. And I sincerely believe that Trump feels that Israel's not a moneymaker for him right now. He does feel that the Gulf is a moneymaker. And I think he is willing to downgrade the relationship with Israel if that's what's necessary to make him get ahead in other parts of the Middle East that are, in fact, moneymakers for him. Netanyahu is not answering that call right now. The other point that's important is that Trump, I think, doesn't want to get involved in new wars, whether in the Middle East or anywhere else. He can often talk tough, he can threaten things, but he doesn't want to really do it. And I don't think he wants to get involved in a war in Iran. I think he would much rather, as we said, do a deal with Iran and make, a big diplomatic impact. And I just don't think that's where he sees Bibi Netanyahu going right now. And that's a big disconnect, I think, in U.S.-Israel relations.
As cracks show in the Trump-Netanyahu relationship, it's worth noting that the US is not backing away from Israel. On Wednesday, June 4th, the US once again vetoed a resolution at the UN that called for a ceasefire in Gaza. It's the views of the two leaders that are forking in opposite directions. One major dividing point is Iran.
I want to make a deal with Iran. I want to do something if it's possible. But for that to happen, it must stop sponsoring terror, halt its bloody proxy wars, and permanently and verifiably cease its pursuit of nuclear weapons. They cannot have a nuclear weapon.
Paul Salem again.
He really wants a deal with Iran. He sees no benefit to fighting with Iran. He's not an ideological person. He's not a neocon. He doesn't look at the US and the world as having sort of permanent enemies and a strategic deployment. He sees wars as impediments to business and trade and investment and benefit for America. So, yeah, he really does want a deal. I think his bottom line is somewhat flexible, as long as certainly they don't get a weapon. So I think that gives the deal a bigger chance. I think the more uncertain partner is the supreme leader of Iran, the politics of Iran, and so on. In the US, Trump, whatever Trump decides to do with Iran will go. It will pass politically in the United States. He is not contested within the Republican Party. Most Democrats would welcome a deal, would welcome any deal with Iran. So Trump is, it's a kind of a one-guy decision-making process in the US.
A deal with Iran could be one of those magical bipartisan issues that are fabled to exist in Washington, D.C. But when it comes to a deal, it won't be the halls of power in the US that will be problematic.
In Iran, the politics is way more complex. Supreme leader is very old. The IRGC is, maneuvering to see, what they will do, when the supreme leader passes, jockeying for, different groups jockeying for the post-Khamenei situation, hardliners, semi-hardliners. The politics in Iran, I think, is much more difficult and much more complex. So I put more doubts on how nimble the Iranians can be to get to a deal versus the Americans. So, one would put the deal, I don't know, at 50-50, but I think it's a serious chance.
When former President Barack Obama signed his Iran nuclear deal, it was not widely welcomed in the Gulf. At the time, relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia were very low, and hostilities were high.
And that is completely not the case anymore. The Gulf countries have normalized with Iran. They've realized that any military escalation with Iran, they would be the first victims of. And they realize that a diplomatic way forward with Iran is pretty much the only way to go for them. Both the Americans and the Gulf countries realize that the blows that Israel has dealt Iran, particularly in Lebanon and in Syria, although that was an indirect effect of Israeli attacks, but that Iran is much weaker, much less threatening than it was 10, 15 years ago. And hence, they're much more favorable and comfortable to a deal with Iran. And they don't have any, extremely strong, different positions than what Trump would agree to, which is basically block the pathway to a nuclear weapon and try to encourage Iran to open up.
While Trump is reaching out diplomatically, albeit moderately cautiously and slightly threateningly to Iran, Israel is outright threatening Iran with military action. Speaking on Israel's Holocaust Remembrance Day, Netanyahu said, "The regime of terror in Iran is a threat to our destiny, to our very existence, and to not only our fate, but the fate of all humanity." This is what will happen if it obtains nuclear weapons. The struggle between us and the terror empire in Tehran will determine the fate of all free societies. If Israel were, God forbid, to lose this battle, Western countries would be next in line. Israel does have a strong military, but a war against Iran would be more of a challenge than either Hamas or a severely weakened Hezbollah. Charles Dunn again.
I do believe that Israel would require U.S. military backup in order to accomplish anything, whether it's logistics supply, weaponry supply, or backup attacks that would enforce what Israel would be trying to do in any, putative military attack. And I think that if Trump says that the United States is not going to back you up in this attack, I really believe that Netanyahu would be hanging out there alone and definitely think twice about launching an attack that he can't back up and knows that the United States is not going to back militarily, because that will leave them extremely exposed, both militarily and diplomatically. And I think that's a big factor in Israeli thinking on this.
Trump is willing to do a deal with the Iranians. It's likely that if the Iranians wanted to come along with him and do what he wants of them, then they would be welcome to tag along. But if they won't sing from Trump's hymn sheet, then they can stay at home.
And what they found is that Trump is perfectly willing to deal them out of the equation, whether on negotiations with Hamas, negotiations with the Houthis, negotiations with Iran, and direct dealing with the Gulf countries. And Israel, I think, is feeling a bit dealt out, as if they don't have as much power, influence with the U.S. administrations as they expected. I think that Trump personally doesn't mind that. He would like to keep people on tenterhooks, including his best friends in the region. And we've seen this in his dealings, obviously, now with Israel. We've seen this in the past in his dealings with the Saudis, for example, when he let them out to dry in terms of continued U.S. aid to the Saudi military back in 2017, before he decided that he was going to reverse that course. So it's very hard to say exactly where this relationship is going to go in the next few months or years, but I think that is exactly the way that the president likes it right now.
There's a story about former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger. When he was negotiating with the Chinese in Beijing on behalf of then President Richard Nixon, he would tell the Chinese, "Hey, this Richard Nixon guy, he's crazy. I don't know what he's going to do. You should be careful," or words to that effect. It was called the Madman Theory. Today, Trump is Nixon and Kissinger. "I'm crazy, you better watch out. Who knows what I might do?" It's a strategy, deliberate or not, that appears to have caught the Israelis off guard.
Yeah, I don't think the U.S.-Israel relationship is going exactly in the direction that Netanyahu and his supporters in the Israeli security cabinet especially wanted to go. Certainly, I think that they expected a much freer hand with their own policy in the Middle East. They've gotten that to a certain extent in what they're doing in Gaza, but even there, Trump is giving some indications that he's not going to be completely complacent with a continuous war in Gaza. So I think there's a great deal of discomfort in Israel, and certainly among the Netanyahu government, in terms of where they think this relationship is going and how much support they can expect from the Trump administration. And, Trump, of course, has prided himself on being completely unpredictable. And this is one of the things that he thinks is his greatest strength in foreign affairs. It's just that Israel didn't expect it to apply to them. I think they expected much more consistent and much stronger support for everything that they happen to want to do in terms of Iran and in terms of Gaza. And at this point, they're not really getting it.
I don't see how Trump and Netanyahu are going to continue to get along. I think Trump expected that Bibi would sort of bend the knee to him, and that, he would end the war in Gaza, he would go along with the negotiations, and that certainly has turned out not to be the case. Trump is very aware that, confronting an Israeli prime minister, even a very unpopular one, I would say, including in the United States, at a time when Israel is at war, is politically very challenging. But it's kind of similar to how he's been a bit taken aback and hasn't figured out how to deal with Putin. He's now taken aback and hasn't figured out how to deal with Bibi. He thought both would go along with him, and both have not. But I expect a divorce between the two come soon. How that will take place, I don't know, but I don't see them able to continue together.
And Trump is making moves to further distance himself from Israel. At the start of this week, Merav Sirin, who recently headed the National Security Council's Iran-Israel desk, Eric Traeger, former lead on the Middle East and North Africa portfolio, also on the National Security Council, and Morgan Ortagus, a high-profile diplomat who played a key role in the Lebanon ceasefire talks, were all removed from their posts. Each one was known for their strong support of Israel. These purges follow on from the firing of National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, known for his Telegram indiscretions, but reportedly removed from his position for engaging in a series of private discussions with Netanyahu concerning possible strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities. One of the bigger stories that broke through from Trump's visit was news that the Qataris had gifted Trump with a $400 million plane. Trump was very pleased with his new plane, and very pleased with the Qataris.
So I think it's a great gesture from Qatar. I appreciate it very much. I would never be one to turn down that kind of an offer. I mean, I could be a stupid person, say, no, we don't want a free, very expensive airplane. But I thought it was a great gesture. And I think it was a gesture because of the fact that we have helped and continue to, we will continue to, all of those countries, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, and others, we keep them safe. If it wasn't for us, they probably wouldn't exist right now.
Maybe Israel could learn from Qatar. Is there a price point for Trump in Israel that might reverse his parting with Netanyahu?
I don't think so, unless they're willing to hand over the Gaza Strip and allow it to be redeveloped, as Trump has said in the past that he wants to do. I don't believe there's enough money in Israel to buy Trump off at the price point that he would personally like. That money exists in the Gulf. That's, I believe, why he's focused so much attention on the Gulf. There are political gains to be made by appealing to Israel. But I really think in Trump's political calculus, that's reached the point of diminishing returns. And I think that's reflected in current U.S. policy.
There was one more political surprise from Trump's Gulf visit.
I will be ordering the cessation of sanctions against Syria in order to give them a chance at greatness.
The idea of lifting the sanctions imposed on Syria had been floated around Washington, but this was a surprise.
What really made it, though, was the personal relationship between President Trump and the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia. In particular, the Crown Prince in Saudi Arabia has fully embraced the new leadership in Syria, invited him, obviously, to the kingdom before, and set up this meeting between the two and convinced the president, and I would imagine his entourage, that this really is a historic opportunity. Yes, there's question marks about President Shara and his group, but that the U.S. and Saudi Arabia and Turkey, who was in on the meeting, have leverage on this new president and this new government. And they should, as a first step, give it a chance and give Syria a chance. Because if Syria succeeds, that's a great, great leap forward for the Middle East in general, for Syria and Syrians themselves, for Lebanon, for Iraq, and for the Gulf countries' ability also to integrate the Levant economically and digitally and connect to the Eastern Mediterranean and to Europe. So it's an enormous opportunity, and I think Trump was convinced, and I give him credit for making a quick decision. This is a decision that will take time, obviously, to implement. It is also something that the U.S. can continue to leverage or keep an eye on, because there's a lot of expectations from President Sharar.
During his trip, Trump met with Syrian President al-Sharaa. It really shouldn't be understated what a big deal this is. If Syria can pull it off, and the ball is really in their court, then it could have a profound impact on the region. And judging by the broad smile on the face of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman that the news exacted, the Saudis too are excited by the prospects. The Gulf has been on the ascendancy for years now. They haven't come out of nowhere. And the US have been firm allies for the Gulf for just as many years. But with Trump, it does feel different. He has no loyalties to the past. He has no interest in historic ties. He asks, what can I get now, today? Not what did some previous administration get 20 years ago. Trump likes the Gulf because they'll give him something today, and it's uncomplicated. When it comes to Netanyahu and the war in Gaza, Trump just sees a complicated mess, an unprofitable, complicated mess. Netanyahu will have to deliver what Trump wants today and keep delivering to Trump tomorrow and the day after and on and on and on, or face the ire of his Twitter account and legions of devoted followers. Final words to Paul Salem.
Trump's vision of the Middle East is very different from what Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government can deliver or be part of. Trump's vision is obviously ending the war in Gaza, but beyond that, securing a historic US-Saudi-Israeli deal that will require, obviously, a ceasefire in Gaza and arrangements in Gaza that are satisfactory to Saudi Arabia and the Arab countries. But it also requires some significant concessions to Palestinians on the West Bank. And Trump wants to get that deal done and get Saudi Arabia normalized with Israel. If Saudi Arabia normalizes, then Syria, Lebanon, potentially other Muslim countries around the world. It would really be a historic breakthrough. I would nominate him for a Nobel Peace Prize if he could do that and get something for the Palestinians at the same time. And he wants normalized relations with Iran. Prime Minister Netanyahu, both himself, his own position, but being stuck, in an extreme right-wing government that is really hanging on by a thread over a fairly hostile Israeli population, Netanyahu cannot deliver the things that are needed to get that vision achieved.
This episode of The New Arab Voice was written and produced by me, Hugo Goodridge. Our theme music was by Omar El-Fil. The New Arab Voice will be back with a new episode shortly. In the meantime, you can listen to all episodes of our special limited series, Sanna's Odyssey, wherever else you get your podcasts. Don't forget to subscribe to get notified for when a new episode of The New Arab Voice drops. You can find a link in the show notes. You can also check out our social media accounts on Instagram and X, both at TNA Podcasts, for additional content. And you can email us, podcast@newarab.com. That's podcast@newarab.com. If you have time, you can also rate and review the podcast, which helps us spread the word. Don't forget to follow The New Arab on Facebook, X and Instagram for all the latest news, analysis and opinion from the region.